Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome back to another round of spiritual podcast. I have with me my very, very good fellow devotee, Radhanand Prabhu. Radhanand Prabhu, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. I'm so glad to be here. We've been connecting after some time and really excited to be here.
Yes. So, for those devotees who don't know Radhanand Prabhu, he's like a expert in the Bhagavatam and cosmology and all of the one very, very intricate and hard topics to understand actually. And I thought like he would be the best devotee to explain all these concepts. Lately we have had this whole Artemis 2 mission to the moon, and I was like, let's like kind of jam and talk about it. But before we even get started with the topic, Prabhuji, do you want to just give a quick background about what got you interested so much in reading the scriptures, cosmology, and just give your background about your spiritual journey as well? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I think it was in my late teens I got really interested in spirituality. I was just completed my 10th grade examinations, and I had some curious questions about the purpose of life. I saw people who were apparently successful but very miserable, and I started questioning the chart or the course that the society expects. And I became a seeker of some sort, and I got some idea that there's, of course, being raised in India, you have some idea about Bhagavad Gita, and I really want to study that in detail. So by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, I received Bhagavad Gita as it is, and it answered lot of my questions. I found it to be very profound. It was appeared very authentic and bona fide, with Srila Prabhupada quoted scriptures to support whatever point he was making. And me being a science student, I found it very authentic and bona fide that here's someone who knows what he's talking about, and he's quoting, he's giving references. So, and then that basically started my journey. And so that was like 1998 when I started. So it's been a little over 25, 27 years now. And of course, Srila Prabhupada has written extensively, quite a bit. And it's, again, I got really interested in cosmology, and it was very difficult to understand initially. But I kept on reading because there's so much information that you probably need to read the translation and purport many times over, also referred to different explanations by other devotees. But then over a period of time, and I started making connections, like the hermeneutical principles, when you not look at one verse independently, but try to relate it to previous later verses, connecting one chapter to another chapter. I started seeing some subtle details and hints when things started really making sense. And, of course, no one can say they can understand the entire creation in absolute detail, but at least whatever is mentioned in Bhagavatam, eventually I was able to be at a state where it started making sense, and then I could explain others who might have questions. So that's the brief relevant background about my interest and studies, interested in other areas as well, but cosmology happens to be one of them.
No, that's amazing. It's so inspiring. Somebody practicing spirituality for 25 plus years is like no joke. It's like such hard work, and the standards are very high, specifically for devotees in the ISKCON movement. So it's amazing to see that you are a inspiration and role model. And it's surprising to also see like if I was just looking at a fact of Bhagavad Gita as it is, it seems to be like the most popular version of the Bhagavad Gita out there. 75 plus languages it's available now. It's amazing to see
Definitely.
how widespread the knowledge is available now, which is nice.
Definitely.
So our topic today, we're talking about this Artemis 2 mission that went flying by around the moon, right? And just for folks who don't know about this mission, basically, there was this NASA astronauts, I think 3 from US, 1 from Canada. They were going basically on the Orion spacecraft, and they orbited Earth twice before trying to go close to the moon's surface. And this is like the first human journey near the moon since Apollo mission in 1972. So this is pretty big achievement for those crew. And I watched all of their interviews on how they survived this whole mission when they are in the spacecraft, how they, even simple things like eating and even like going to the nature's call, maintaining your health. It's a very, very difficult journey for any, astronaut to actually go on board this kind of mission. And from what NASA seems to describe about moon, and what they took the pictures of moon from what they described. They seem to say that moon is like a kind of a barren land with a lot of giant rocks. There's like no cities, no forest, no visible civilization, at least not to the naked eye. And I thought, like, who better than you to kind of explain a different perspective, right? Because our scriptures have a very different vision of the whole world. And obviously, Elon Musk and a lot of other folks are spending billions of dollars, SpaceX and all, to go to moon and Mars and really kind of discover what's happening there and maybe spin up a new life there. So, Prabhuji, maybe help us understand, like, how a layman can understand how the universe is designed from Bhagavatam's perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a very relevant question. And especially within ISKCON movement, those who are practicing devotees, this question comes upon quite often. And there are many doubts and confusions around it. And you'll find people who have very strong opinion one way or the other. So uh, it took me some time to basically resolve some of these doubts. But today I'll take the opportunity to present my understanding, and I will also quote relevant references from the scriptures, specifically Bhagavatam, and I'm hoping we can definitely answer that. So I think you asked two questions. One was specifically about what exactly is moon, the perspective of modern science versus how the scriptures look at it. And then I think there was a more generic question about the structure of the universe. I don't know which one you would like me to address first.
Yeah, maybe give us like a high level understanding of how the universe is structured and what we or the science kind of seems to refer to moon versus what our scriptures seem to refer. Like maybe just like even high level understanding is good, and then let's dive deep into moon specifics after that.
Right. So I'll give you a very brief, high level overview of the structure of the universe, and then we can dive into a question related to the moon, and then maybe we can again come back to if there are further questions on the overall structure of the universe. But if we, we'll have to take a step back and talk a little bit about the Vedic worldview, right? The idea of the living entities, the souls or the jivas, as we say, and the consciousness, right? Soul is essentially a spirit consciousness, and it is full of desires. There's desires that we have unlimited desires, and all these desires are actually present in the soul because souls are part and parcel of Krishna, and Krishna is raso vaisaha. Right, so he is full of different rasas, different emotions. These are different mallows by the exchanges with his devotees. So it's not surprising that we, being part and parcels of Krishna, we also have different desires. Now, in order for different desires to be fulfilled, right? We want to when we at some point we wanted to enjoy and independently of Krishna. And so this entire material creation, which is subject to creation, decay, destruction, was brought about. And different bodies are suitable for different fulfilling different kind of desires. And just a very raw example, like if I want to basically travel very fast, I need a mechanical means, maybe a car or an airplane. Right. So on land, like car is the best way to travel fast. But producing car takes a lot of effort. You need fuel to power it. But a cheetah, which is the fastest terrestrial animal, can do it very efficiently without any extra endeavor. It doesn't require any other mechanical means. So different bodies are suited for different kind of desires, and so that's why the scriptures describe there are 8.4 million species of life, and these different species of life are spread around the entire universe. There are certain categories which are present in each part of the universe, but scriptures mention there are 14 different what they call planetary systems. So it's not 14 planets, but 14 different realms. Seven of them are subterranean, and then seven of them are basically above what we call the terrestrial land, or scriptures describe that as bhumandala. So all these different realms are available according to the different prarabdha or different karma of different living entities. Just like somebody wants to go to America by legal means, then they need to have certain qualifications to be eligible for immigration. Similarly, different realms are accessible to different living entities based on their pious credits, pious or impious credits. And so certain realms are just not accessible to living entities who don't have the enough credit. So many of these realms, they are beyond human perception, right? So there's no mechanical means to go and access a particular loka, right? So whether it's subterranean or those which are above the Bhumandala, one requires enough pious credits to go there. So there's no mechanical means to go there. But we'll park that for a moment. I'm sure there are many questions about that. But that's
Is
a
it
good segue into.
is it also easy to kind of relate this and say, for example, if you are using an AI tool, if you don't have enough credits, you cannot access that tool. Similarly, if you're lacking credits, you cannot access the higher realms where higher beings are staying, basically.
Yeah, that's true, right? I mean, even with all the imperfections that we see in on this planet, there are countries who actually enforce immigration, right? So somebody wants to try to enter, let's say, the USA, but they find it illegally. There's the book, like ICE is quite pretty much in the news nowadays. So basically, if someone even gets here illegally, then they will try to deport them. But even there's a lot of enforcement at the border itself, right? If somebody tries to cross over from Mexico, right, they will basically stop them. So what to speak about those beings, authorities, the demigods who are much more have authority and power to enforce in a much more efficient way that you can't even see those ramps. Forget about trying to enter that, right? So one can relate to that. So that's definitely a good example, as you mentioned, right? The analogy compared to the credits that someone has to use any AI tool. So yes, definitely credits are relevant everywhere.
So this is interesting, helping us understand like the concept of this, especially from the Hindu scriptures, we understand Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam really talk about the concept of soul, reincarnation, and then this whole what you're mentioning, the higher realms and your karma actually needing enough, you could say, credits karma to really even go and stay, something like that. So it's interesting to understand, and I mean you could think of these things very logically, right? If I want to meet Mr. President of the United States, I need some higher access credit or connection to really go there. So similarly, I just whimsically can't think of just okay exiting Earth and okay going to some higher realm just by its my desire to go there. I need some capacity, karma, all of that, whichever term people feel familiar with, right?
Right. Absolutely. That's true.
So help
And
us understand from this perspective when we talk about 14 planetary systems, like beyond Earth, what else is there where beings stay actually? You talked about the concept of devatas, right? The scriptures mention about many devatas. So
Mhm.
which planets are there outside Earth and which kind of devatas stay there? Like help us understand maybe first.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a relevant question logically. I think that's something we can dive into. So, out of the 14 planetary systems, there are three what are referred to as middle planetary system. Three sarga, the three creations, which is Bhu, Bhuvar, Swarga. So, which are these three of them comprise a middle planetary system. So Bhumandala, which is where the Earth is located, actually the Bhumandala comprises of many concentric islands, and they are separated by oceans of different kind of fluids, as is described in the 20th chapter of the fifth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. I think it's titled "Studying the Structure of the Universe." And of all these concentric islands, the island at the very center is known as Jambudvip, and then each dvipa is divided into many varshas. The southernmost varsha on the Jambudvip is Bharatvarsha, which actually refers to the entire, what we call the entire Earth planet. And then within the Bharatvarsha, there is Bharat Khanda, which refers to the Indian subcontinent. And, if you recall, like anytime a yagya is performed, you might hear the priest mentioning the name of the location where the yagya is performed. And then they would say, Jambudvipe Bharat Varshe Bharat Khande.
Yeah.
So the Bharat is mentioned twice. One is refers to the Bharat Varsha, which is the Earth's planet, and the Bharat Khanda, again referring to the Indian subcontinent. And then they would mention the name of the specific place where the yajna is performed. So within the current human body that we have access to, or sorry, the human body that we only have access to what we call the Earth planet, Bharat Varsha. We don't have enough pious spirits to even access or perceive the other Varshas present on the Jambudvip. What to speak about other islands, the concentric islands which are mentioned in the Bhumandala. Now, if you look at the 20th chapter, the fifth canto, it describes in detail the all the places on the Bhumandala. There's a description of all the islands. And then Jambudvip, there is another chapter which describes specifically Jambudvip in much more detail. Now, if you see the descriptions of all these places, you'll find detailed description of flora, fauna, and also the living entities who reside there. So there is definitely human-like species or humans, and we call manav, right, in Sanskrit. So who are residing there, and not only that, for each of the islands description, four classes of men are described, right? So the varnashram system, which again is not manifest in Kali Yuga right now, but which is practiced in Bharatvarsha, is also practiced on all the islands of Jambudvipa. And four Varnas are referred to by different names on each of these islands in the 20th chapter. So they don't use Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. They don't use that terminology. They use a different set of terminology for each island. But if you look at the Sanskrit meaning of those four terms, it actually translates to the four. So basically, these realms, everyone on Bhumandala, again, they are not demigods per se, but above the Bhumandala, there is Bhuvarloka, where the lesser demigods reside, right? So the Gandharvas, the Charanas, Vidyadhars, right? There are other living entities that reside in this realm. And then above that is the Swargaloka, which specifically refers to the top of Mount Meru. So the I'll take a step back, but the entire structure of the universe appears like that of a lotus. Just like, I'll give a very mundane example. If an artist wants to create a chair, so there are two aspects. There's an aesthetic aspect and there is a functional aspect. So even an ordinary carpenter, if he's making a chair, he might model the chair of a particular shape, right? You like simhasan, like, we typically see hear about that. Basically, it's an ashan, a seat, but then you'll see forms of a lion or the legs of the chair or asan. They're modeled after the leg of a lion. So there's a creative aspect, an aesthetic aspect to it, and there's a functional aspect. So Supreme Lord Krishna is the supreme creator, so it's understandable that when he creates, it's not simply a functional design and there's an aesthetic design. So he modeled the creation in the form of a lotus. So the entire Bhumandala is like a whirl of the bottommost whirl of a lotus. And then there are different whirls, which in a lotus, when you see there are many whirls, each whirl gets smaller until they come to the central uh, filament. And then between those whirls, there is water that is filled, right? Because, the water can easily seep in from the water reservoir where the lotuses. Similarly, the concentric islands that you see described in the Bhumandala, they are basically like the whirls of the lotus. And the different oceans, the concentric oceans, are basically the water that is filled between the whirls. And in the central most part, if you ever observed the filament in the center of the lotus, many people eat it also, right? It's called kamar kakadi, right? That's in the Indian vernacular language. But if you carefully observe the filament of the lotus, it's actually gets narrow at the bottom and it's broad on the top. And the structure of Mount Meru is like that filament of that lotus. It's also, Bhagavatam says, it's broader on the top and it's narrow at the bottom. On the top of the filament of the lotus, if you observe it carefully, you can see nine distinct yellow circles, one of them in the center. So this the Mount Meru on top of Mount were the nine cities of the nine primary demigods. The central one being that of Lord Brahma, and then the other eight are in the four primary directions and the four secondary directions, and each of those are actually the cities of the demigods, right? So eight primary demigods, their locations are mentioned. So, of course, the demigods also have residences at other parts of the Bhumandala on top of Mansottara mountain, which is lying at the outermost Dvipa, the Puskar Dvip, on top of which the sun moves around. But if you see the geometry, it is so perfectly resembling that of an actual lotus. The filament of the lotus, the top of it exactly appears like the nine cities which are mentioned in the Bhagavatam. So within this, where exactly does the moon reside? Right, that was the original question.
Yes, yeah. And
So
just also before we move to the moon, basically, just to kind of conclude or summarize from this conversation so far, there is basically, I think, the famous Gayatri mantra, right? So it kind of
yes,
starts
yes, yes.
describing realms outside Earth, which is nice. You kind of described it very wonderfully, how all these different planetary systems where the devtas are residing, and there's even gradations within that, going right up
Right.
to Brahmaloka, right? So it's nice to kind of understand that perspective as we go into the moon aspect now. So yeah, I think maybe let's like kind of jam into the moon aspect now. How, because when we see the moon, when I go outside, okay, I see the sun, the moon, and then when these astronauts, when they take pictures of Earth and moon, it feels like, wow, is this how really moon it is, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely true. So how do we resolve this? And actually all the answers are there in Bhagavatam. So I would specifically like to point out to a particular concept first, and then I'll go to a specific verse. See, there are different terminologies that are used in the scriptures. Also, our science uses different terminologies. So different luminaries of the solar system, they are referred to as planets. And the moon is not considered as a planet, it's referred to as a satellite of Earth because it simply revolves around Earth, right? According to science, that's how it is defined. Now, the word planet itself comes from a Greek word, which actually means one who has a wandering motion. So, Ptolemy was a Greek astronomer, and when he first started studying the solar system using a telescope during the medieval times, one of the things that he observed was that if you observe the position of any planet, right? Of course, Uranus, Neptune, they were not, they are not visible by through a telescope. They're way far out. But up until Saturn, like if an astronomer, what he observed was that if you observe the location of the planet every single night in relation to the background of the constellations, right? So because you want to look at there's one thing to locate the position of a planet on the horizon or in the sky rather, but then the planets also they rise on the eastern horizon, and they through the night they rise up and they set on the western horizon. Now different planets they rise at during different times. Some of them rise during the night, some of them rise during the day. A day we cannot see it because the sun's bright. So it's not that they all rise in the night. It's only certain planets are visible in the night because others are rising in the day. So anyway, so for those who are visible in the night, you used to observe the location of each luminary. Now, as they are moving through the sky, in the background, you would see the constellations. So the 12 zodiac signs are also there on what we modern astronomy calls along the ecliptic elliptic, right? So and what he observed that over a period of time, it appears that a planet actually is moving faster compared to the constellation. So maybe let's say Jupiter is at the very end of the sign of Cancer, right? And then slowly over many days, you will see that it is progressing further from, if you look at the sign of Cancer, which is a crab. So let's say initially it was on the rightmost part of the sign of Cancer, and then over a few days it came in the center of the crab, and then it moved further left. Now what he would then observed is that over a period of time it appears that the planet is now again moving back, right? So this is called retrograde motion, what modern science is. So this retrograde is just an apparent motion. So, but in reference to those constellations, that retrograde motion appears like, hey, what's happening with the planet? Why is it moving forward, coming back, moving forward? But it's just a different relative speeds. From our perspective, it appears what the science calls it a retrograde motion. And there are many videos on YouTube which explains these apparent retrograde motion how it occurs. So it's a known phenomena, right? So I won't spend much time over there. But planet literally means a a luminary that has a retrograde motion. Now, in scriptures, we don't find the word planets. There are two words which are described. One is grahas and lokas. So lokas are those realms where life exists. The word loka itself means living beings. So when the 20th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam talks about the different islands and saying Bhuloka or Bhumandala. So it refers to those realms where the life exists. So that's Loka. Now you will find again in the description that just like the demigods, they are residing or they have their office of, if you will, if you want to call that like an official
Post.
residence. on top of Mount Meru, but they also have residence on other parts of Mount Mansotar, which is like a circular mountain on one of the outermost islands, which is the Puskar Dweep. So, like on the northernmost part of the northern vertex or the northernmost point of that circle, Mansotar mountain, is Vibhauri. And Vibhauri is the residence of moon god, right? So, what we call Chandra Loka is not the moon satellite that we see.
Hmm.
It is a residence in a different realm on top of Mansottara mountain that is not visible to our eyes. While the luminaries that we see, they are called the grahas. So now, if you look at, as I was saying, the description of Bhumandala, it is full of the Bhagavatam talks about the life there, the flora, fauna, the living entities who live there, the human beings, the four varnas are described. But there is another chapter which in Bhagavatam, right, which is talking about the movements of the luminaries, the suns and other luminaries. In that, you will find no description of life, right? There is a chapter which talks about moon, Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, Mercury. There is no life described there.
Hmm.
So, right in Bhagavatam, you can see wherever the life exists, it's described, and where the life, as we call it, life, right, it doesn't exist. But those are the places which we can see, right? So we
Hmm.
can see all the grahas, and when we see those grahas, right, the Mercury, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, whatever, right? So when we see them, their description is also there in Bhagavatam. Their orbits are mentioned, their heights are mentioned, but there's no life described. On the contrary, if you look at the subsequent chapter where the Bhumandala is described, right, which we cannot access, right? If you tell anyone, okay, well, where is this island? Is this, appears very fantastic? Is it even real? But that's where the life is described. So I wanted to make a distinction between two words, grahas and lokas.
Hmm.
So lokas are where basically the living entities reside. But why are the grahas referred as graha? So the root word graha means to accept. And we find that in the term vigraha. We refer to the deities as vigraha. So vigraha means a entity which can basically reciprocate to our emotions, and they have the superlative ability to accept our offerings in a way that we cannot really, it's basically bhav, right? If somebody is really love, then Lord
Yeah.
will accept the offering. The bhoga that is offered to the Lord, he can just by his drishti, he can accept it. He doesn't have to taste it like we angani yasya sakelendriya vritti manti. Right? Each of his
Yes.
organ is perfectly able to perform the function of every other organ. So graha means they have a particular quality. So that quality is also described. So Bhagavatam, when it's describing the luminaries, the moon, Venus, Mercury, you will find the description of moon in Bhagavatam, where all the orbits of the different planets are described. Even their nature is described. So graha means these luminaries have accepted a particular nature, and by this nature they are influencing the lives of the human beings specifically, but living entities, there are different prarabdha that we have accumulated over different lifetimes. We are getting the results in this lifetime again at different times during the span of our life. So the whole science of astrology is basically understanding which prarabdha will manifest when. And these luminaries have this particular nature, and they are basically manifesting the different prarabdhas for living entities. For instance, I'll read this excerpt from Bhagavatam. Of course, there's astrological aspect and there is other aspects also. Like Bhagavatam, that chapter where the luminaries are described, it talks about how the weather and the rainfall and this are actually specifically the rainfall, the weather, and the life is affected by all these different planets. For instance, it says Venus nullifies the influences of planets that are obstacle to rainfall. Consequently, its presence causes rainfall. It is therefore considered very favorable for all living beings within this universe. This has been accepted by learned scholars. Then it describes Mercury similarly, Mars similarly. And when it comes to moon, it talks about how moon is the source of all the rasa. It's the moonlight that provides all the juice and the nectar and the
Hmm.
fruits and the vegetables, right? So in this way, the nature, graha, the nature that this has these luminaries have acquired, that is described in Bhagavatam. So now you have two different entities. You have the Chandra Graha and Chandra Loka. So Chandra
Hmm.
Graha is what we perceive with our naked eyes, but there's no life that exists there in the form that we know. And Chandra Loka is where life actually exists, but we cannot access it. Of the fifth canto,
Yeah.
5:21:11.
Yeah.
And in this verse, Bhagavatam refers to both Chandragraha and Chandraloka in the very same verse. And that's why in Sanskrit, we have different terminologies for different purposes. So you have Chandra Graha and Chandraloka. So, I when now coming back to the original discussion, when you mentioned different
Yes.
astronauts, we have cosmonauts and astronauts traveling in by mechanical means, and they are traveling around moon, or they might do that for other luminaries which are much further far out.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of effort, energy, and time. It's very risky, but it's by mechanically one can go there, because see, these realms are visible to us. That
Yeah.
means we have credits, we have pious credits or within our karma to access these realms, but there's no life that exists over there.
Yeah.
Life exists in other realms, and there's other residencies are mentioned. It's mentioned right over here in the Bhagavatam. So I hope this makes sense. If there are any
Yeah.
follow-up questions, I can happy to take that. And there is
Yes.
another related point that often comes up: what is nearer, the moon or the sun? And that's another question that often devotees have, and at appropriate time we can also take that if you like,
Yeah.
and happy to throw some light on that.
Yeah. I think I really enjoyed how you kind of help explain this two different concepts, grahas versus lokas. I think and that's not very well known outside in general, even in, let's say, in the spiritual communities, or even in the normal Hindu circle. I think it's not very well known that there's this two distinction, and you really so well explained how these two really matter. So we are able to see the grahas, but we are not able to access the lokas, right? And that's where the actual
Exactly.
higher devatas and everybody reside there. So it's interesting to see
Correct.
those two perspective, which is nice, because otherwise it seemed like our scriptures don't seem to agree with science. But here actually scriptures not only give a higher view of the whole universe, which even science does not have really easy access to from the naked eyes, right? Yeah. So
Absolutely.
it's really nice to get that understanding, because otherwise people seem to sometimes undermine our rich Vedic philosophy, Vedic cosmology, and all the wonderful knowledge that our scriptures have to offer. But it's nice to see this perspective, because it reconciles and also gives a higher point of view, which is nice, right? So it seems like at least we are not alone in the universe, and there are higher realms where the devatas reside, which we obviously don't have access to because of, let's say, our karma and credits. But there we can get access to by good karma, obviously, right? And that's something looks like to understand, because science is kind of mechanically approaching that problem and saying, no, no, we'll just go there and try to figure out. It looks like we need to also take that other angle of us not having the access to those lokas right now.
Yeah, when it comes to modern science, of course, they don't have any information about the local. There's no attempt to even go there. But science is based on direct perception, which is also subject to the defects. There's only so much we can see.
Yeah.
But whatever they're able to see, they are trying to access that in a mechanical way. How realistic is to live on Mars or moons? That's another question. I think we have one beautiful planet over here, and we have basically caused about an ecological havoc on a perfectly habitable place. I don't know how realistic it is to live and establish colonies in places which are inhospitable to begin with. So,
Yeah.
but that's a separate topic.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It's really nice. I really enjoyed our conversation. I think at least I have a better understanding of, I've read the fifth canto, but when you explained it, now it makes a little bit more sense than what before. Otherwise, I understood, but I was like, okay, maybe I don't completely understand it as well. And the lokas versus grahas, I mean, I think that concept is so unique in itself that needs that you explain it so articulately, so very well, right? And it's good to also see that our scriptures give a full understanding of the universe. So people who are really curious about the universe and who are only looking from the science angle, I think we should encourage all our listeners to also come and read all this wonderful Bhagavatam and other scriptures that are offering a completely new perspective about your universe, right?
Definitely, yes. I think a lot of understanding comes by repetition. Like as you get more familiar with the subject, and each time you read, it starts making more sense, right? I mean, everything is described. It's just that, because of whatever conditioning we have, we are not able to see the truth, which is right there in the words.
Yeah.
And, it basically percolates slowly after multiple attempts. And I think that's true for any kind of domain knowledge that one is trying to achieve. Of course, we have to sincerely pray to Guru and Krishna, not trying to master a subject, but to basically serve and understand it, and one has to make many attempts and read it, swadhyaya, or read it again, right? Consult those who have better realization, and I think it's a gradual process.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you, Radhanand Prabhu. I think my appreciation for the Lord's creation is much more enhanced now thanks to all the wonderful explanation you have given. And I hope our listeners will also enjoy learning about this, and maybe it sparks a curiosity in them that they buy the Bhagavatam books in their homes and they start opening it and be like, okay, wow, we haven't read this in our science books. Let's read about universe from a very different angle. So they will appreciate the Lord's creation much more after this talk. Yeah. So thank you so much, Prabhuji, for coming here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here. Hare Krishna.
Yes.